We've talked a lot throughout this course about the blinding effect of pride and how you become unaware of your strengths, weaknesses, or unaware of your weaknesses, overestimate your strengths, and so on. And we've talked about why that happens. We've talked about the lens and how it distorts reality. We've talked about the development of the self-image and how the lens distorts that element of reality and distorts the true nature of it into an inflated, deflated version. And I think the next thing to do is look more specifically at pride's actual strategies and how it's actually going to cause you to be less effective, and how it's gonna manifest problems in your life. So this chapter is essentially going to be spent looking at the more specific aspects of pride. And so in strategy for war, there are a couple of different. There are three different types of strategy. First is the grand strategy. Grand strategy is essentially your overarching goal for success. Strategy is more the main successes you need to have in order to attain victory in your grand strategy, and that grand strategy is going to bring about victory. And then the third level is you're going to have your tactics, and those are the specific maneuvers you're going to be making in order to be successful in your strategies. And we're going to look at this more specifically with pride, and the analogous grand strategy and tactics for pride are going to be at the top. Pride's blinding grand strategy, which we've already discussed in detail. It just blinds you to reality. Your self-image and your perspective on reality become less representative of truth, and because of that, you become ineffective and you're defeated. And then what we're about to look at, we can consider pride's strategy. The first is going to be grandiosity, and we're going to look at how pride may attempt to make you more grandiose, and then the failures that you're going to have due to your grandiosity and what you're going to have to lose. And the tactics that pride employs, we can consider, are going to be the specific ways for you as an individual that pride is infiltrating, right? So grandiosity is a strategy it can employ on everyone. But as an individual, you may grow grandiose in your goal setting. Perhaps you'll grow grandiose in the opinions that you develop, thinking that this one opinion accounts for all these complexities in reality. And we aren't going to go too far into the tactics in this chapter, but we are going to look at the universal strategies, and then it's going to be up to you to see how these strategies apply or manifest in your own life. The first effect I want to look at, or the first strategy, is grandiosity, which is essentially what we've been talking about this whole time when it comes to your weaknesses. Grandiosity is the most direct effect of having an inflated self-image. What you're going to do is, like we've said, you're going to focus on your weaknesses. You're going to focus, or you're not going to. You're going to be blind to your weaknesses. You're going to examine only your strengths. You're going to overestimate the value of your accomplishments, and this can lead to a lot of results, undesirable consequences. One is that we may become resentful to the world because we think that we deserve more than it's giving us, when in reality we have overestimated the value of our accomplishments. Another consequence is that when we embark on any endeavor, since we're not aware of our weaknesses, we're very susceptible to failure. We aren't aware of the ways in which we could fail, and we aren't able to strategize around them. When we're overly focused on our strengths, we tend to overestimate our limits, and when we embark on any venture, we'll end up becoming discouraged because we didn't take into account the reality of our current position in life and the reality of where we were, of what our capabilities are. And that's ultimately at the root of grandiosity, is the overestimation of your capabilities. When you're aware of your weaknesses, you're not going to overestimate what you're capable of. When you're not aware of them, you will. When you're reality of your strengths, you're gonna overestimate what you believe you're capable of. This is essentially depicted in a lot of histories, archetypical mythologies. The most notable one that comes to mind is the story of Icarus, who was imprisoned, which is in a sense representative of the deflated self-image, and he's somehow acquires these wings that are made of wax, and he's like, oh, hell yeah, like I can get out of prison. And he's all, look at me, I'm so awesome, I can fly, I can do all this stuff. I'm not bound by my chains anymore. But he doesn't recognize, or he's blind to, the weakness of his wings, which is that they're made of wax. And he goes and he flies too close to the sun melts his wings, and he falls from the sky and freaking dies, which is pretty intense. But that's pretty that very well depicts the archetype, or the archetypical manifestation of grandiosity, which is that in some cases we have that deflated self-image, we feel chained, bound to the earth, and we somehow free ourselves from that binding, and in our freedom we focus only on this grandiose situation we're in. We feel like we're just flying high above the world, and then blind to the weaknesses of our strengths. We fly too close to the sun, we go one step further, we go too high, and we have the great fall. And there are many illustrations of this throughout history that we will examine. Napoleon Bonaparte is a great example of grandiosity, and how it can cause you to overestimate what you're capable of, and to spread yourself or your resources thin, or overstep your bounds. And so let's hop right into him. First off is the rise. He's definitely representative of the classic rise and fall. And essentially, what happens is he doesn't have any kind of royal blood. He's kind of an outsider in France. He doesn't have rich parents or anything, and he's not very notable. Although he did pretty well in military school, really loved by his friends or his peers or his teachers even. But when he began his military apprenticeship at the age of 16, he had this belief that he was destined for something great. He was determined to prove himself in the military to become great. And so during the French Revolution and the Australian campaign, he exhibits great skill, and he shows his very impressive ability to maneuver and employ very creative tactics to defeat the enemy. And there's actually one video I saw where you see some of France's troops up north and his are down south, and you can see France's northern troops receding, and then his troops just absolutely demolishing and charging its way through the enemy territory, eventually coming up and behind the advance on the northern troops, which is pretty interesting. And he was a phenomenal tactician. And as he goes off and fights all these fights, he inflates his public image, and a lot of people begin to really admire him. But what I think happened here was he confused his projection, the public image that he crafted. He confuses that with his true self. I think if you want to, because in politics, for example, you have to be able to inflate your public image properly. But in order not to fall into grandiosity, you can't confuse your public image with your true self, because then your self-image naturally inflates towards that inflated public image that you crafted. Now you can use emotional awareness, which we'll get into later, in order to craft an inflated public image, and then vulnerability tactics in order to make sure that inflated public image doesn't screw you over. But regardless, you have to make sure that you're moving your self-image towards your true self instead of towards that inflated public image. And he screws that up. He moves his self-image towards that. He confuses his projection of himself with the true nature of himself. But he has numerous victories, and as he gains a lot of power and control, he ends up crowning himself emperor, which a couple of people do throughout history, and is, it's always kind of questionable when somebody does that. So as emperor, he basically inherits a France that is more powerful than any nation in the world, and probably the most powerful state France has ever been in. And it's very, very, it has the opportunity to prosper at this time. It's post-revolutionary. He starts creating a couple of systems that are fairly effective, but what he doesn't do is he doesn't listen to his advisors, such as Talleyrand, and Talleyrand eventually gets pissed off about that. I don't know if Talleyrand wasn't exactly one of his advisors, but Talleyrand would certainly advise him. And so he wouldn't listen to the advice of those more experienced politicians around him. He was a tactician, a general on the battlefield, and now he was trying to run a country, and he made the mistake of thinking that his talents and his strengths on the battlefield would just naturally transfer to this new type of work and new type of strategy that he had to learn. And in his arrogance, in his grandiosity, in his pride, he believed that he was capable of this new type of work that he hadn't actually learned how to do. And there's some grandiosity in that. And another thing that starts happening is he wants to recreate the Roman Empire. And a couple of other people tried to do this throughout history. Mussolini was one. And those are generally also, it's kind of one of those telltale signs like crowning yourself emperor. He wanted to recreate the Roman Empire, bring it back to its former glory. And of course, he wanted to recreate it with himself at the top. And this, of course, is a very grandiose goal. The territory he would have to reconquer for that is kind of ridiculous. And I think it blinded him to the opportunity that was presented to him in ruling France. Because if he had approached it perhaps more like a Pericles or an Alexander the Great, although Alexander the Great was kind of grandiose, or certainly Augustus, maybe even Julius Caesar, he would have seen that the state that he was ruling had a huge amount of potential. And if he had instead consolidated his efforts to France itself instead of to this grandiose goal, he could have essentially turned France into what would still be one of the great world powers. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he wants to reconquer the Roman emperor and ends up conquering too much territory. And to some degree, what drives this is his belief that he was destined for greatness. And this is the quote I was looking for just a second ago. When he was young, he says, "I foresaw what I might be. Already I saw the earth flee from beneath me as if I were being carried into the sky." I think that was a dream, or maybe a daydream that he had. Certainly a grandiose fantasy, or a success or a victory fantasy. And what happens is he pursues this grandiose goal and he conquers way too much territory than what he can handle. And well, he gets spread too thin, and eventually what happens is territory is way too big, and he's balancing a battle in a war in Spain and another war with Austria. And so there was really no reason to conquer Spain beyond just grandiosity, greed, and some degree of unbridled aggression. And he's fighting one war in Spain, and this is another thing that's pretty funny to watch happen on maps is he runs over to Spain, and because he's still a great tactician, he fights and expands his territory in Spain, and while he's doing that, his territory by Russia is receding. And then he runs over and uses his great tactical abilities to reconquer all that land he lost in Austria. But while he's doing that, his land in Spain starts to recede. And so that's a very visual representation of I think what can happen when we grow grandiose is we take on too many responsibilities, more than we are actually capable of handling. And we start focusing in on one part of what we're trying to deal with, of this overestimation of what we can handle. We focus on one part of it while other parts of our life start to fall apart. And then we shift our focus, and while we're trying to get those parts put back together, the other things that we're trying to deal with also start to fall apart. And so in that case, what you generally need to do is manage your resources better and consolidate your efforts. And that's not what he did. Instead, he continued to expand his territory, attempting to recreate the Roman Empire, and drained a huge amount of resources into this pursuit. He ended up killing off basically a whole generation of men, and he squanders his opportunity to solidify France. And when he finally goes and invades Russia, he gets absolutely demolished because he left himself in such of a weak and vulnerable state. He also pissed off a lot of people in the process, and so to some degree he's blind to all the enemies that he's creating. And if he had been more humble, he probably would have given more of his enemies who he conquered more power. And if he had done that, that's something Julius Caesar did. If he had done that, they would have been less likely to invade and attack him once he was weak. But unfortunately, he invades Russia. He's blind to the weakness of his key strategy, or tactic, really. And the tactic that made him so successful was essentially that he would train his armies or his troops to be capable of living off the land, essentially. And so they would run around, go to these battles, and because they were able to live off the land, they wouldn't be slowed down by carrying all of these resources, and they'd be able to maneuver around their enemies far more efficiently. And another thing he would do, and this wasn't really important in the Russian invasion, but it's interesting, is he divided up his army into much smaller segments, each containing the different aspects of a full army. So they were all like little mini armies with a cavalry and the troops and the horse people. The horse people are cavalry, but you get the point. Anyway, so he's blind to the weakness of his greatest tactic when he enters Russia. And what this does is Russia kind of realizes how to use this against them. And their grand strategy against the great Napoleon is basically to run away, because nobody else could ever beat him without running away. So they run away, and as they run away, they burn everything behind them. So while Napoleon and his troops advance into Russia, they're not able to survive off the land, and in a sense end up getting trapped in Russia. And then when the Russians turn to fight them, they get totally demolished. And Napoleon barely gets back alive, and then the rest of the nations who are already kind of pissed at Napoleon turn on him and defeat him, and he gets banished to the island of Elba, where and that's the next story, but where he's pretty depressed because he doesn't get to bring his inflated or his grandiose goals to fruition. A more specific manifestation of grandiosity that I want to examine is that of grandiose goals. And it's essentially what grandiose goals, what they are is when we set goals in an emotional state of pride, focusing only on our strengths, only on our past successes, ignoring our weaknesses and flaws, as we've discussed time and time again. And we begin to think that we're capable of all this and that, when in reality we aren't. And while we're setting these goals, whatever they may be, we're getting consumed by thoughts of greatness and by thoughts of, oh, how grand we will be. And we're not thinking so much about the process of getting there as much as the being there itself. We're thinking more about the accomplishment and less about the process. And this becomes problematic when we start to, look at the process and think see similarities to certain parts of the process that have caused us to fail in the past, and we rationalize why it will be different this time, when we haven't actually taken any real actions to avoid that. Furthermore, in setting goals in an emotional state of grandiosity while feeling filled with a sense of, capability, we become blind to the reality of the hurdles that we will face. Sometimes we'll rationalize why we won't face these hurdles, or we think, it'll be fine, I got this. But since the driving force for achieving this goal is an emotional state, when that emotional state inevitably wears off, we're going to be much less motivated. And then when the monotony of pursuing any worthwhile goal inevitably creeps in, we won't have the underlying drive. The underlying drive won't be powerful enough to carry us through to the end, because we set this goal purely on that emotional surge. We then, at this point, once the emotional surge is gone of grandiosity, and we're left with the monotony of work, we become aware we've laid out for ourselves, and we start to essentially dread the project. We start to feel anxious about it, and over time, as our progress fades, we start to become very discouraged. Another possibility is that perhaps we do continue to pursue this goal, but because we didn't take into account our capabilities, and one of those may just be time constraints or physical resources at hand, and because we didn't keep those capabilities in mind. They could also be more mental capabilities as well, but because we didn't keep our limits in mind, we become very spread thin, and our focus becomes scattered, and we start to kind of weaken our ability to function perhaps in other areas of life, because we're investing too heavily into this goal. Another very dangerous consequence of grandiose goals is that sometimes we believe during this emotional flurry that investing heavily into this goal is what's going to carry us through to the end. And we might think that, if if I take action right now to commit myself through these means, then I'll do it. Such as when, maybe we think, oh, I'm gonna become a race car driver, and oh, I want to become and then we invest all this money into like a membership to become a race car driver, and buy the most expensive race car, and like, oh, look at this, I have, we get the best gear and all that, and it's like, now I've invested so heavily, I have to do it. But then the grandiose emotions fade away, and we're left just feeling incredibly defeated and stressed for the amount of investment that we've now lost. If you find yourself unable to maintain consistent progress on any goal, and if you find yourself unable to actually complete certain goals, then grandiosity very well can be at the root of that problem. A few other quick notes on grandiosity: the grandiose feeling that comes from not being aware of our limitations, and that grandiose feeling drives us to act in certain ways that overestimate what we're capable of, make us ineffective, make us discourage us when we are faced with the reality that we aren't as capable we had thought. Grandiosity can also cause us to believe that our skills, and this is a more specific byproduct of overestimating our capabilities, but we may believe in false skill transference, is what we can call it, which is where essentially you think, oh, I was successful in that area, so I'll be successful in this area too. And that's not necessarily true.
Howdy, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Conquering the Deadliest Sin. Check out more of these on my YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, comment if you have any thoughts about whatever the hell I talked about in this episode. Check out the other episodes in this series. It builds on itself, so I can go more in depth with certain concepts, certain topics, certain ideas than I would be able to in a quick 10 to 20 minute video. As you'll see throughout this series, a lot of the strategies that we're going to use to counteract pride involve developing self-awareness. Excellent way to do that is by journaling. Imagine if you could connect your journal to the mind of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. I made an app that allows you to do that. Essentially, you can go in, type in your reflections, regurgitate all the thoughts, all the ideas, all the experiences into your phone here, and then you'll be able to talk with a version of ChatGPT that's been connected to the meditations by Marcus Aurelius, as well as other Stoic texts such as On the Shortness of Life by Seneca, The Discourses by Epictetus, another book by Seneca, what was it? The Letters of a Stoic. So go ahead and check that out in the description. Get that app, give me a review, tell me what you think. Let me know if there are any features you would like to see, anything that you think should be added, any issues that you might find. I'm a solo app developer, kind of trying to figure it out on my own, and I would love any feedback from you guys that I could get. See you next time.